Support Narrative's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download. Hey everybody, welcome to Narrative Live. It is a very special edition of our show because we are finally here at this impeachment phase in our lives. We've been talking about impeachment, it seems like forever, and here we are. So we're going to do a special tonight with my good friend Gary Darden, who's a professor of American history from show, because we are finally here at this impeachment phase in our lives. We've been talking about impeachment, it seems like forever, and here we are. So we're going to do a special tonight with my good friend Gary Darden, who's a professor of American history from Fairleigh Dickinson, I should say it correctly, in New Jersey. And of course, this is, you can't say enough about how historic this moment is, even though some people say we can't get to conviction. Still quite a historic day and a couple of days that we've had. The scenario right now does not look very likely that the Senate will convict Trump. It's just, there's not much that you could look at in terms of the number of people in the Senate who might flip. We were doing the numbers before we went on the air. 20 Republicans need to flip. It's so hard to imagine that happening. But there are things that could happen between now and then that could change the scenario completely, as happened with Nixon. And we're going to look back a little bit at Nixon throughout the hour. We're going to look at the things that changed his prognosis, but also what might happen to Trump, because there's a lot of sharks in the water ahead. You pointed out earlier on that Nixon had an interesting ratio of polling numbers that helped people understand that we were in the impeachment zone.
Yeah, the Pew Research Center recently put up a graph that showed basically two measurements. One is the approval rating of Nixon's job. That's sort of the green-yellow line at the top left. And you can see that stood at about 51% in early 1973, slid up in the direction of about 70%, and you see a steady decline as it moves down into 1973. The blue line, the lower line, is the percentage of Americans that think that Nixon should have been removed from office, so to impeach him and then convict him in the Senate.
Right.
And where those lines crossed was in the fall of 1973, when the number of Americans that wanted him out was actually higher than the number of Americans that supported him. So right now, more Americans want Trump to be removed from office than actually measurement of his approval rating. I think we're at the information stage, because what happened up until this week was that what Americans were hearing was being filtered through what congressmen were saying in front of a microphone. To actually hear an ambassador or a State Department official say what they heard and what they witnessed is very, very different. And this is what Sam Erwin had done in the Watergate hearings.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
And the Watergate hearings were important because they let the primary characters in the Watergate scandal speak directly to the cameras and create sound bites that could be digested in the evening news. And in this instance, I think if Trump's approval ratings slide down in the direction of the low 30s, and the number of Americans that want him tried and removed from office approach 60, he's in a danger zone. And that's mainly because the Republicans are going to start running for the mountains.
Right.
If they think they can win with Trump in 2020, they'll stick with him. If they think he's a hindrance, then you will see certain congressmen, certain senators, and governors begin to pull back their support.
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency, and that if the cancer was not removed, the president himself would be killed by it. I also told him that it was important that this cancer be removed immediately because it was growing more deadly every day.
Quite a significant moment that was for everybody. I think when they saw John Dean, who's this, much the same way we looked at yesterday's testimony, these guys look so, clean, lovely, the bow tie, the whole look, the diplomatic corps in full force. There was nothing impeachable about these people giving testimony against their president. And Dean was a lot like that, I think, for people during Nixon.
Yeah, Dean was the squeaky clean lawyer, although he went to prison. But he was the guy that sort of said to them, yes, there's a problem here. And the men that testified this week did not necessarily work in the Trump White House. They were State Department officials. These were ambassadors basically saying that what happened was wrong. We have yet to have someone that's actually inside the White House, let's say anonymous, were ever to come public. Someone inside the White House to come and sort of throw him under the bus.
And that might happen. We might still see, in terms of the things that might happen between now and then, we might still see John Bolton testify. There might be others. Earlier on today, there was I think it was the Washington Post or maybe the Wall Street Journal announced that what the White House administrator who signs off on the aid to Ukraine, who made the delay in that aid to Ukraine happen, he is going to testify, and he's also going to provide the written proof that there was a delay. We hear about it a lot. We understand that there was this notion of this arms for dirt deal that happened. And by the way, a term I think we coined, or I coined on narrative, but seems to be going elsewhere. This idea that arms were traded for dirt on Biden, and when you look at the calendar now, as it's been fleshed out by these hearings, what it looks like is that there was a 6-month delay between the initial approval in February of $391 million, but that was when it was approved by Congress. Soon afterwards, Trump told Mitch McConnell that the money would be released immediately. Then it's July when they have the do us a favor, though, conversation. And then the next day they have this newly discovered restaurant called from Kiev. And then it only is in September, once the Department of Justice tells the White House that there is a whistleblower complaint and that they will start investigating it in Congress. That is when 2 days after that is when the aid was released. That's a 6-month delay that the president potentially illegally held back on aid to Ukraine, which was, as we've now heard many times, especially from the Bill Taylor testimony, is an indication to me that people died along the way. People don't understand that this is just, maybe it's just aid to Ukraine feels like this mythical thing, but in the East Ukraine and in the Donbass, they're having a serious war against our biggest enemy in the world, and we're the one thing that's stopping them from complete destruction. So it's that 6 months is a significant thing. I don't think people have quite seen it on the timeline like that, but it certainly struck me.
Well, some of the Trump supporters in Congress are saying, "Oh, well, the aid was eventually released." Well, the aid wasn't released until it became public that there was a whistleblower.
The aid got released,
sort of like saying there's an attempted robbery, but I put the merchandise back on the shelf.
Right.
When they called the police.
Or the cookie jar or whatever. It's the same scenario. If you've attempted to steal it, you've stolen it, and it's too. This is a 6-month delay. We're not talking about just a few minutes here. This was happened over a long period of time. And in those months, we're going to start hearing over the next few days, there is this very complex scheme led by Rudy Giuliani and others who are, back and forth in Ukraine, trying to get the ambassador fired, trying to get all these, the system to bend to their new rules. And it turns out to be a disastrous era for all of them. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's testimony from the ambassador because I think she's going to really make it clear how personal this was. On the one hand, we've got Ukrainians dying. On the other hand, this is a diplomat who is suffered enormously because the president was out to get her. Said she's going to experience things. She was, basically snatched out of Ukraine in the middle of the night.
Her 33-year career was destroyed by her firing by the Trump administration. There will be a large block of the country, not a big majority, but a minority, that will believe that Trump is being wrong no matter what happens. It's the question of getting a solid majority of Americans to support this and make senators fear for their reelection.
The Republican Party, which is been the party of freedom in America, the party of libertarianism, really, is now acquiescing to this idea that democracy is dead, and that we need I did a little graphic here to illustrate it, like sort of a democracy light. They're all about having an America with less freedom, less election freedom, certainly in terms of voting rights, less equality, and less human rights in general. Because by acquiescing to Trump, to all his demands, they're basically saying Putin gets to tell us how the world is run, and that their version of democracy over there, which is really more about capitalism than it is about freedoms, that we like, about freedom of speech or freedom to vote. It's amazing to me that the Republican Party of all parties is the party that's in favor of limiting freedoms, of this lighter version of democracy that makes no sense. It's kind of a stunning turn of events. What do you think is driving all of that?
Survival.
Mm-hmm.
No one thought that Trump was going to beat 16 Republicans to get the nomination. And then he gets the nomination. And he's got 85% of the Republican Party supports him. And this is a higher number than Reagan had back in the 1980s. And as long as he dominates that party and he has the support of the party, then most Republicans are terrified to break ranks with him.
Right.
People were afraid of Joseph McCarthy, the senator from Wisconsin from the Red Scare, but he was only a U.S. senator. He wasn't the U.S. president, and the president has a lot more power over the party than someone like Joseph McCarthy. So to shake Trump and to shake the party, the Republicans are going to have to see that there is a political consequence of their support, and that means losing elections. And what happened in the special elections this November in places like Kentucky and Virginia, what happened in the midterms last year should be a real wake-up call for the Republicans. Turnout in the midterm elections in 2018 is midterm elections are typically low 40s, high 30s best. And in the last midterms, we had 50% of eligible voters vote, registered voters vote. That's the highest in a century. And some political scientists estimate that this year's turnout could actually clear 60%, even go as high as 67%. If that's the case, and enough of these newly energized voters are anti-Trump, it's going to shake the system in this election.
You could end up with a one-party state, one-party system for the Democrats. I mean, the backlash could be so huge that they could get a blank check that they've been dying to get for so long. And this could be one of the biggest mistakes the Republicans have ever done.
I mean, it could be, but there's the haunting scenario that this election's still going to boil down to a couple of states. It's going to be Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. These are basically the states that are going to decide the election. Trump can actually get trounced in the popular vote. Huge margins in New York, California, and then he ekes out an electoral majority in those margin states.
When do you think the president found out about Watergate and the cover-up?
I haven't any idea, Senator. I haven't any idea at all. Because as I testified before, that if the president had found out about it, obviously he would have pursued his responsibilities in that area very vigorously.
And you were afraid to tell the president, rather I won't say afraid, but you preferred not to tell the president and didn't tell the president because you didn't want the president to do what you call lowering the boom.
That's exactly correct.
And if he had lowered the boom, why, the thing would have been exposed.
I don't think there's any doubt about it.
And the American people would have learned about it.
They would have learned about
And
it.
it might have affected the votes of the American people.
It's quite conceivable.
Yes.
That's correct.
Now, did he also talk to you about the candidate you should spend most of your time on in terms of your political activities?
Yes, sir, he did.
And who was that candidate?
That was Senator Muskie.
And did he indicate why?
It's difficult to recall any exact conversation at this time. That was some time ago, but Senator Muskie at that time was certainly the forerunner, shall we say, of likely prospects to run for the Democratic nomination.
That was so interesting to me because that guy, Donald Segretti, and I think he's one of the sort of the dirty tricks guys for the Nixon camp. It was targeted at Muskie. Watergate was not just a hit on the DNC. It was not just a robbery on the DNC. It was targeted at the front runner in the Democratic race. And that is I think people certainly know it, but it's not something that people have drawn much of a reference to with relation to Biden. It's the same thing. It's here's Trump going after Biden, Nixon was going after Muskie. Now that scenario might have changed by the time they got to the election, but that was who he was targeting.
Oh yeah, I mean the broad charges against the Nixon campaign and his campaign staff, his White House staff, was to find a way to interfere in the 1972 election. Mm-hmm. And this was sort of the dirty tricks campaign. What Trump was doing with Giuliani was attempting to use Ukraine to create a dirty tricks campaign to basically blight Biden as a frontrunner.
Right.
The difference here is he's doing this in an international setting, not in a domestic one.
It's a huge difference. I mean, that to me is that that's one of those things that you've just got to stop and say, the reason why this is so much bigger than Watergate, the reason why this is so much more important, is because we're playing geopolitics here, and the influence is being borne by our, or at least placed on us by our Russian adversaries.
And it also, when you talk about bringing in a foreign entity into this, it also begs the word treason comes into mind.
Right.
What you're really thinking about here is that Giuliani almost becomes the G. Gordon Liddy of this. G. Gordon Liddy was sort of a cartoon character that actually he was responsible for the plumbers that broke in to DNC headquarters. They then threw him under the bus. He went to prison. This is all G. Gordon Liddy. It's a random, wild offshoot group. And we found out, no, it wasn't. It goes straight to the Attorney General. It went to senior people in the White House, very close to the president. Nixon did not know of the break-in, and he did not order the break-in. We know that. When he was told of the break-in, he then ordered a cover-up. And what the investigation unfolded was a mass web of dirty tricks with hiring hecklers to go to campaigns, go after not just the DNC, but go after leading candidates. And Trump seems to be taking a card from this playbook.
They aren't really covering up in this case. They're doing probably the right thing, I should actually say, because had they been going out there and disputing the facts as they did it with Nixon, it would have been a different story. But their defense right now is completely lame. I mean, it goes between, show us the whistleblower. Who's the whistleblower? That's irrelevant to, well, that's just hearsay. Yes, but you guys are the ones holding up all the witnesses who might have a first-hand account, and anyhow, others are coming. Then there's this other thing that they're talking about, which is that it's Mueller 2. We're just experiencing an extension of the grudge, which started with Mueller. Also nonsense. It is an extension, but that should be a challenging thing to them, not a positive thing, because Trump and Putin started messing with Ukraine even before Trump was in power. And then they go into this sort of the so what, the quid pro quo sort of defense, which is, yeah, he did it, but so what? And the so what is that you are wrecking the American democracy, that you are taking our rule of law and shattering it by allowing a scale of things to happen that we've never, ever allowed to happen in this country. I mean, we've never encountered a situation where we've allowed anyone to, at least knowingly, use a foreign power to help influence an election. And now you're saying twice, because they supported the Mueller, or at least thought the Mueller report exonerated him, and now they're again saying, "Hey, it's okay. It is okay. Let him do what he needs to do. He can go work with every dictator in the world and support every dictator in the world as long as we get to stay in power." It's ludicrous in every way.
Yes, I mean the focus for the Democrats. Look, they're going to try to say, "Hey," they say it didn't happen, then it did happen. Then they're going to say, well, it's not that bad of a deal. Some of his supporters are saying, well, it may have been a dumb thing, but it's not worthy of impeachment. The Democrats have to focus on the illegality, that there's hard evidence the president broke the law. And Nancy Pelosi's shift to use the word bribery today, because the word bribery is an explicit aspect in the Constitution when you talk about grounds for impeachment. So bribery, treason, these are all things that are in the Constitution that are directly tied to that article on this. And so Nancy Pelosi's shift on the script today was important because I was tired of hearing quid pro quo.
The things you can impeach people for, They're basically treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. I didn't put it in there, misdemeanors, maybe because I can't spell misdemeanor. No, I can, but it just didn't fit in the space there. But also there's the obstruction, under this high crimes and misdemeanors thing is this idea of obstruction of justice and abuse of power. Those are kind of mushy things. They're impeachable offenses for sure, but I think for the American public to be convinced, they're going to want to see this bribery charge be borne out. I'd even argue that, considering we are basically at war with Russia, I know people find this kind of a ludicrous idea, but the Russians are at court all the time defending their actions against the United States by saying it was an act of war. From their perspective, they were at war and are at war with the United States by doing all these things that they've been doing. We've never acknowledged that here, that we're at war, but we are definitely in the midst of an information, disinformation, cyber event of some sort, which you could call war. I even think this could rise to treason. Maybe we haven't got there yet, but it could, when you look at it from that perspective, the fact that the Russians themselves say it was an act of war, we might be, once all the facts come out, looking at a man who's really committing treason.
Well, yeah, we are definitely in a new Cold War with Russia under Putin. The difference here compared to the real Cold War is that Trump seems to be, when it comes to Erdogan and Putin, he's basically siding with them. Trump's behavior in the presence of Putin is very different than his behavior around Macron or Boris or Angela Merkel. So I really do think we have a serious problem. The burden on the Democrats is to convince the American public he broke the law, he committed bribery, he committed treason, this is worthy of impeachment. And they have to basically nail that message like a nail gun to the American public and make sure that the people testifying are providing the information they need to sway public opinion.
The next thing I want to talk about, and we should listen to another clip from the Nixon days, is the drip, 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 which is sort of this. It's not going to stop. We've only on day one, and we're already getting surprises. Yesterday we heard about a brand new phone call that Trump had with Sondland. Today that was confirmed, and today we also found out that a big administrator of his is going to affirm the fact that they held back the aid. Those are all extremely significant finds, and we're on day one of an inquiry, not even a trial. Here's a look back at what happened in the Nixon era when things started coming
It's
up.
revealed a situation both within the committee to re-elect the president and within the White House, whereupon everything that was touched was corroded.
No, sir, I will not in any way, shape, or form ever accept that allegation or contention. There is no way that any man in this country can make and establish the case that everything in the White House, everything the White House touched was corroded, and I think that does a grave disservice to this country even to state it.
So there came a time when you were administering an investigative unit.
Yes, in a literal sense, that's true.
In a literal sense?
Yes, sir.
But not in an actual sense.
Well, here I am dueling with a professor.
No, I'm not dueling with you. I'm just trying to get a...
Professor, if you say actual, it's actual. Congress is the only one that's got legislative power, and I don't know anything in the law that gave the president the power to set himself up what some people have called a secret police, namely the plumbers.
If the president could authorize a covert break-in, and you don't know exactly where that power would be limited, you don't think it could include murder or other crimes beyond covert break-ins, do you?
Oh, I don't know where the line is, Senator.
Well, where is the check on the chief executive's inherent power as to where that power begins and ends?
President, I was aware of listening devices. Yes, sir. When were those devices placed in the Oval Office? Approximately the summer of 1970.
Alexander Butterfield, what was he? Do you remember what he was in the Nixon White House?
I don't recall. What his testimony is to say is that conversations that the president had in the Oval Office were taped.
Right.
And that made Congress's eyebrows hit the ceiling, saying, oh, if conversations are taped and there's an archive of these tapes, then we can actually find out verbatim what the president said in the Oval Office.
And this was the big reveal that everyone freaked out about. I mean, it happened late in the game. I mean, he was hiding 18 minutes, as we all know famously now, but and those 18 minutes eventually came out. So,
well, he didn't want to give the tapes, and went to the Supreme Court, and
Right.
the Supreme Court said he had to hand over the tapes. When the tapes were handed over, there's the famous minutes missing, even
Right.
though what was still in the tapes said he knew of the cover-up, he ordered it, and he said there was money to pay for it. So in other words, what the tapes said is that the president had been lying about his knowledge of Watergate and his knowledge of the cover-up.
right.
We're past that stage with Trump.
We already
because
know.
we already know that he ordered
Yeah, I mean,
to the Ukraine to be forestalled for dirt on Biden.
we do know. I mean, I got to say, this is the one thing I think they're doing slightly differently, is they so far have not contested the facts, and I think that's just because the facts are completely not contestable. I've been reading The Federalist. I have this. Someone gave this to me a while ago before we predicted an impeachment. The two of us and Tracy predicted the impeachment on this show maybe 6 months ago. Now, maybe it was for slightly different reasons, but we were among the first, I think, to say that an impeachment was maybe coming. So now I'm going to step out and say there will be a conviction, but you don't have to join me in that yet if you don't want to. But it's interesting that the idea of like where does policy fit into an impeachable thing? It's never really shows up in the Federalist. Hamilton talks a lot about, we could see a vote down party lines, and that's troubling, although he doesn't explain what could happen. He potentially that does lead to civil war. He talks about there being a distinction between what happens in an impeachment trial, and the person could still go on to then face legal jeopardy in a judicial trial. So you could get impeached and then tried for the same thing in an ordinary court. But he doesn't talk about this idea that America has a system, a policy that shouldn't be messed with by the president only. Like that why is it that Donald Trump has been able to make these wild deviations in the Middle East and with the Kurds and in North Korea without anyone being able to say that is impeachable?
Whoever has the answer to that question and can put it in a book form will have a Pulitzer. The thing is that I've never in my I'm hard pressed in U.S. history to see a moment where a president has literally tamed a party to his will to such an extent. Reagan didn't do this, Kennedy didn't do this, Clinton didn't do this, Obama didn't do this, and he's throwing a lot of traditional orthodox U.S. national security policies out the window.
Yeah, I mean, look, I do think, and I hope this is true, that there is a backbone to the American system that is going to reject Trump's policies. That at the end of the day, whether they convict him for this or they convict him for the several other things I think we're still going to discover about what he's done globally to benefit himself personally, we're going to, this has got to, this can't continue. America can't continue to sustain itself like this. And there's no ways that even the Republican Party want to face 4 more years with this guy in the White House. I just don't believe that that's, maybe, I'm not talking about the people in the House, I'm just talking about the institution of the Republican Party, the people who fund it, the people who push all these crazy agendas items into the world. Those people can't possibly want to see another 4 years of Trump. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, they can't, but they need a safe way to do it, which goes back to the point you and I discussed before about a secret ballot.
Right.
If there's a secret ballot in the Senate, which would require all 48 Democrats and 3 Republicans to say this is a rule for the impeachment trial of Donald Trump, then that means whether it's 1, 2, or 3 articles of impeachment, that when the trial's over and the senators are asked to vote on each article, if they vote in secret, it means they're guilty or not guilty is going to be on a piece of paper or done behind closed doors.
Of course, that means that they're more likely to be bribed and blackmailed into those votes too. I mean, there's an upside to what you're saying, of course, but there's also a downside that they, because it's secret, you never know.
Well, if it's secret, they don't know.
Right.
And so Jeff Flake seems to think there's about 30 Republican senators who would, if their ballot was secret, would vote to convict and remove Trump from office.
He does. Interesting.
Now, the question of what they, obviously the press and the voters in their states are going to say, oh, Senator, how did you vote? And how they're going to answer that is another question. But a secret ballot is that, it's a come to Jesus moment for these senators to decide what's more important, the dignity of the Constitution or defending the indefendable president.
Gary, thank you so much for spending the time with me
Absolutely.
tonight. It's been fun. It'll all show up in a nicely edited podcast soon. In the next couple of days, I got to do that. Gary Darden is a professor of history at Fairleigh Dickinson. I'm never going to get it right. Fairleigh Dickinson. Such a nice sounding name. In New Jersey, and a brilliant guy all around. And I thank you very much for sharing your opinion. I'm sure we'll do it again if you're willing to come on again, because I feel like the story is not going away anytime soon. So that's the show for tonight. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll be back with a very special narrative live this weekend, where we're going to go deeper into Giuliani. Part one of our Giuliani series, There's Something About Rudy, was about his ties to the mob. Part two was about his ties to Ukrainian oligarchs, so basically secretly funding his little operation. And part three is explosive. Here's a look at what's coming up in part three. It all involves oil. Support Narrative's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and download.